Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of the Entrusted to Lead podcast, where we dive deep into the heart of leadership and all the things that really matter. I'm your host, Danita, and today I'm excited to be joined by Ben Arendt, author of How to Suck Less as a Manager and the founder of Depth Charge Consulting. Today, we're going to tackle an incredibly insightful topic that we've unofficially dubbed Bring Your Emotions to Work Day. Ben shares his expertise on managing emotions, both in leadership and in the workplace, and offers actionable tips to help you thrive. So grab your cup of coffee and let's get ready for a conversation that's as real as it gets. Doing things alone is entirely overrated. We all need a community to thrive. And that's why I'm part of an online community of writers and speakers, podcasters, and entrepreneurs called Cultivators. And I love it. In the years since I joined this community, I've launched new ideas and I finally executed the dreams that sat on the shelf for years. Seriously. And I was able to do this because of the outstanding group of mentors, exceptional training, and encouraging mastermind groups with my new friends who did and continue to give me invaluable feedback. Oh, and not to mention all the fun, because we have had lots and lots of fun. Have you ever said, I want to write a book? Or do you want to use your voice for the exciting world of podcasting? If so, Called Creatives is your best resource for up-to-the-minute industry training, expert advice, live coaching, and peer support like no other. Best-selling authors and speakers Allie Worthington and Lisa Whittle lead this community with a no-competition mission, and it shows. So join my friends and I in the Called Creative community. Head to my show notes, danitacummins.com/podcast, and click the link to get all the details to join. I promise you won't regret it. I look forward to seeing you in the community and watching you grow. Hey friends, welcome to the Entrusted to Lead podcast. Today, I am blessed to share a conversation with Ben Arendt, an author and the founder and principal advisor at Depth Charge Consulting. And we are going to dig into how to disentangle our emotions. And we have unofficially dubbed the title of this podcast episode, Bring Your Emotions to Work Day. So we hope that it is enjoyable and educational for you. So before we get started into all the deep dive pool of emotions and feelings, Ben, how are you today?
Well, from an emotional perspective, I'm feeling very regulated, Danita. By the way, I think it's so funny. I talk a lot about emotions and I look forward to the conversation, but it's always funny. Maybe we'll talk about this in the journey. And I know we talked about your journey too. I never knew this is where I was going to end up. I started writing this book about a variety of things and then the emotions just came to the top. So I'm thrilled to be here with you today talking about it. And I'm feeling emotionally glad and grateful to be chatting with you.
Emotionally grateful and glad. Those are good. I'm going to write those on my Post-it as my little barometer, my emotional barometer that I'm working on as I'm trying to be a better listen to myself. Before we dive in, you want to talk a little bit about your consulting company, how you help leaders and organizations thrive.
Yes, absolutely. So at Depth Charge Consulting, we take my experience from a circuitous journey of a career that I think circuitous is a nice way of saying I've done a lot of things that together have given some interesting perspective, working with executives in IT functions and HR and sales at Gartner and then later at Challenger. And of course, Danita, we share a little bit of a public service background with my service to the US CIA. So a lot of things that I've picked up about great leadership and management over time. And I partner with executives and their teams to help drive a variety of managerial outcomes through workshops, coaching, conversations, and keynote speeches and the like. And always thrilled to help organizations more effectively tap into their talent and help people thrive, both in the leadership sense and in the ground level sense.
So do you, in that kind of journey, like you've said, this adventure journey that you were on, did you find, you said this at the beginning, like where you are today is not where you thought you were going to end up, but it's where you seem to have planted roots for a while. Was it a specific problem that you saw, or was it just these lessons that you learned over time where you thought that this was something that was important and necessary for leadership and organizational growth?
It's funny because I'm actually working on my next book, which is How to Suck Less at Managing Your Career. And I started on this to get to the question, but I started on that because I did not have a plan. I kind of times felt like I was a dog chasing cars, trying to learn about the world and things that were out there. You know, the public service part, it started because I'm diabetic, so I couldn't be in the military, and I wanted to do something for the nation, and loved it, and then wanted to also explore other options. And as I went through all of these various experiences in the private sector, the public sector, the social sector, what drove me day to day was people more than a particular problem I was trying to solve. I looked for people that I admired, that I thought I could learn from, and that I would enjoy being around. Also, English, very difficult on a Friday as we record this, Danny. Yeah, not enough coffee. Well, I'll be chugging it throughout. So if I choke listeners, it's because I'm trying to get coffee down as fast as possible.
Trying to just survive. Yeah. Emotionally, we're working through it.
Emotionally, we're great. Intellectually, I mean, you know, I always joke I'm from Florida originally. So I'm Florida man. So if something goes terribly wrong, but I'm curious if you've had the same experience. Looking back, I see the connection now, the things that I was drawn to, what I learned, and why I ended up here. Because regardless of what company I worked for, regardless of what organization I was with, the things I gravitated toward were how do I effectively coach people and help them be their all? I feel like I've done a lot of cool stuff in my career, but the things I'm most proud of are the times when I helped someone who wasn't achieving what they wanted to get to that next level. And I can, think of all those examples. That's what I think of at night when I'm reflecting on my career. So you see the threads in the rearview mirror, maybe not in the front, but I know you've had a really awesome career too. Does that resonate with your experience?
It does. And I think my husband and I laugh sometimes. We're like, it's a cool bar story. At the end of the day, you get to that place, you're like, yeah, cool bar story, but what do you do with it? I was actually having a conversation with our office manager for a nonprofit this morning. We were talking about legacy. And I'm in this season right now where I'm really super, not motivated, but like trying to see the things that are eternal, I say, for lack of a better word, but just that are lasting after the things of this world kind of disappear. And so I'm using that lens, if you will, to look back across my life. I lost a good friend a few weeks ago, so that it's prompting me to be in this very introspective space, which we all, I think, go through in different seasons. Like you get to that place where you're like, what does it really matter? And then I feel like it's a huge blessing when you get to do that in the younger part of your life, because we're not probably in the third. You and I, we're kind of in that middle section. And it's such a great blessing to be able to kind of look back and say, these were things that I did I'm super proud of. I met amazing people. I learned a lot. But what are the themes that, like you're saying, really speak to me as a person? And then how do I want to take those seeds and plant them for the future? Like that's the part I think that I'm in even just today. What are the things we want to do? How do we want to create organizations, or how do we want to create opportunities for people to be able to live their values in their life and to create a framework, food, clothing, shelter that enables and empowers them to do that? And that, I think, I didn't know that when I was 20 or 22, or I didn't even think I knew it at 45. I'm 47. I think it's literally an evolution. And I think that's the beauty of growth. And that's the beauty of like learning, because you're constantly, if you're open to it, which is what we're going to dig in today. I think if you're willing to say, I'm humble, I guess that would be the word. If you're humble enough to say, I'm going to be vulnerable, I'm going to look at myself, I'm going to be introspective, it's going to be messy, it's going to probably make me feel not so good. But I'm going to do that with the intention of trying to be a better version of me and to serve the people to the best of my ability. And I think if you're honest and if you're humble in that space, then you learn these things, like you're saying, over time. I don't know that they just come to you. Sometimes they do, maybe in the middle of the night, you might get that aha moment. But for me, I think it's more of intentional, introspective thing.
So if you're listening, then you're not able to see my head nodding so vigorously. I think I was getting whiplash. It's funny because this directly ties into a conversation I had this morning with an executive I'm working with who said, hey, what do you think is the most important key ingredient to be an effective leader? And my answer was humility. I'm sure you, just as I have encountered a lot of leaders, a lot that weren't very good, a lot that were pretty terrific. The things which always told me that somebody was going to be great, was a leading indicator for that person. Did they have a sense of themselves? Like, were they able to think in a meta way about how they thought, recognize where they had gaps, and see the value in other people and their perspective? And I think the key ingredient to all of that is humility, that I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to be smartest person in the world. And I have something to gain from all these interactions, because then that also creates that intentional reflection, which, like you said, When I was 20, I definitely didn't have that. I think it hit when I was, in my 30s, like, oh, look at all these things I can learn from mistakes or from other people, and realizing how much I have to gain.
So we talked a little bit about that, I think, but we say as leaders, we know that we have a bias about how or why people get upset or angry at work, right? So that's kind of back to the bring your emotions to work day, which we don't, that's like taboo. So that's why Ben and I are like, well, let's just put it on the table and see what we can make today in our feelings casserole on Friday. But you say we should be open and honest about those biases and how they make us feel, which I totally agree with. And that we need to purposely or intentionally strive to understand our feelings, right? So we need to do that with intention and on purpose. So the first question I have is, why should I care if I'm a person that I like go to work and somebody that I'm working with has a bad day? Like, that's the first question. Like, why should I even care that that person beside me is struggling with something?
Well, I mean, there's the human reason, of course, as we're kind of built in, most of us, of course, there are some who aren't, but, when you see somebody who's not feeling good, there's this intrinsic desire, I think, to lift up other people. But let's take that off the side. That's the touchy feely stuff. I have these conversations with executives about emotions, and I can immediately tell, okay, where does this person stand? And I use some like leading language to try to get their reaction around things like emotional regulation, which can feel really soft. Some of my favorite people to talk to are sales leaders, because that's an environment where a lot of the time we pride ourselves on just being really miserable at times. It's tough, it's stressful, it's challenging. The last minute you may or may not make your year, or you're prospecting a deal for a year and then it falls through. And a lot of them will say, well, why do I care? Why do I care about how my people are feeling? So the example I always give is, if you, and I'll do this for sales, but then we can make it more broad. If you are a salesperson and you've been forecasting a deal, you're very close with the potential buyer for like a year. And then out of the blue, you show up to a conversation and that person says, I'm sorry, but we're being acquired and I can no longer do this. You've invested dozens of hours and pinned a lot of your hopes and optimism on this. And through no fault of your own, you will now fail at this pretty serious, thing that you've been forecasting. And then you got to turn around and go to another meeting and with another prospect or client and pretend like everything's fine. That's why understanding yourself and the way that we think and feel is crucial, because it is very hard to roll from experiences like that. In the same way, more and more I hear talking with executives, especially in the talent HR space, you don't stop being yourself when you come to work. I'm about to be a parent for the first time.
Yay! Congratulations.
I know. Thank you, Danita. But it's one of the things I hear is be prepared to be tired all the time. Well, you can try to be prepared. Yeah, and I know sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not. It sounds like you didn't have that experience, maybe.
Oh, I did. When my second daughter was born, I didn't sleep for 7 months. I was exhausted. But there's no preparation for that. You know what I mean? It's not like the Couch to 5K where you can just like download the app and you're like, every day you need to stay up 2 hours in order to get yourself in the mental space what you're going to live. No, you just jump off the cliff. Yeah.
Okay, let's take that. So there's no preparation. It's going to happen. Now, I'm very lucky because I have, first of all, I'm gainfully employed, knock on wood. I have my lovely wife is gainfully employed. There's two of us. We can split duties. We also both have really flexible jobs. So there's we can do different shifts. And if I am up all night, then, I have the ability to flex my next day. What if I'm a single parent and I don't have that? And I'm the sole income provider, and maybe I'm taking care of a parent as well. But if you take all of those factors out, I'm also the most productive, effective, brilliant person you have on a team. That person is not going to be able to be their full effective self. And if I'm a leader and I know what that person is capable of, then being able to, I love the word you used at the beginning, find grace and set up circumstances where we can try to both validate that person, how they're feeling, create energy for them, but also be understanding of their situation. It's going to pay, not just because it makes us feel good, but that's going to enable that person to maybe once the kid is older, come back to work and be at their full productivity. Or in the moment, find the one thing, let's say about your product or your strategy that you're missing, that's the key ingredient that enables you to grow and win. So there is absolutely a business imperative with enabling people to continue to be as effective and energized as possible through these kinds of trials and tribulations.
And do you think that's like a generational shift? Because when I was having this conversation this morning, we were talking about that exact thing. Like the person on my team, she said, I don't know how people who don't have a flexible work schedule do this. Like just the stress of like 3 kids, we're back to school now and soccer practice and spelling words and lunch boxes and little tiny shoes, and all the things that you have in that season of your life. And I think that's part of it is this myth of this concept of work-life balance, right? Which is kind of fractured now, which I'm thankful for because it opens up the aperture for us to be able to see, no, like I can still provide food, clothing, shelter. I can still be a successful contributing member to a business, organization, ministry, government, and do it within the construct of loving my family and myself well. Like that's not a panacea, like unattainable thing. It just means that we as leaders have to shift our mindset and reframe like what we think organizational success looks like and whatever. So I think that's happening from a generational perspective, but I also think technology has a lot to do with it. So I'd be interested to see what you think.
I think yes to all of the above. So, boy, we're having similar conversations. The one I had earlier this week was, hey, I have 5 generations in my company. Like, how do I deal with that? I mean, first of all, that's crazy to think about. But second of all, yeah, everybody's got different expectations and needs. And frankly, whether it's because of generational expectations or it could just be where somebody is in their career, somebody who's close to retirement is not going to want the same things as somebody who just entered the workforce. I think key to it as a leader is being curious, interested, and fostering true conversations so you can get at the root of what do you need to be successful? I had one individual working for me who the only thing they wanted was my approval on a couple documents once a week, and they were thrilled and they did great work. I'm like, okay, great. I had another who really needed probably once in a month to just vent about all of the people at the company that were driving that person crazy. If that's what you want to do for half an hour and it means you're going to turn in phenomenal work and help me make money for the company, awesome. We kind of get to the root of generation and expectations. Like what's at the root is trying to understand the people that you have and finding the ways that you can enable the things that they need. Because the other piece of this too is, and this is especially with younger generations, there's a ton of turnover, even in the market right now, which is very much a company buyer market. We saw the average tenure in role go from 1.8 years, which is pretty low a couple of years ago, to about 2.3 now. And that's especially pronounced in the folks that are earlier in their career. They're going to leave at some point, but the longer that you can find ways to align the work that they're doing to the things they care about or create the conditions that they need to thrive, the longer they're going to stay, and then you don't have to pay for the expensive hiring process and onboarding somebody and going through all that rigmarole. There's always a business reason behind it.
Yeah, I have a goal or perspective when I look at employees or team members, and I do this a lot too with volunteers because I work in a nonprofit. So also, right, bivocational. So that whole paradigm of leadership and connecting with people and helping them find intrinsic value, like that looks a lot different in a volunteer space because the incentive structure is completely different, right? There's not money. It's all about something else, and you have to really get underneath the surface. But I say that a lot to people too. Employment is it's a contract, right? Both parties have a voice. You're not a victim specifically, and you have the space and opportunity to kind of decide if you want to be a part of this team or you don't want to be a part of this team. And if you don't want to be a part of this team, that's okay too. There's nothing wrong with that. It turns bad. It turns bitter and resentful and jaded or toxic. Like we don't need that, right? But if you're not happy, back to the understanding your own feelings, we have a responsibility to do that as people. And then as leaders, I feel like we need to be able to be okay with having that space, like you're saying, and just people may come and go. But I always say to people, like, leave well, whatever that looks, make that a priority. You can leave any company, but you need to do it well, right? What does that look like to you? Don't be disrespectful. Don't be a jerk. Don't whatever. And I think that, we're not really good at that either. It seems to be this like, oh, traitor, contentious thing. And it doesn't need to be. Like you're saying, people aren't happy there. That's okay. But we just have to create a space where that, I guess, more open.
I agree. It's funny. I was having, again, this conversation with a different former colleague of mine who was taking it really personal. And I said, hey, you ever seen The Godfather? And they're like, yeah, well, why do you bring that up? It's just business. Like at the end of the day, it is a contract, and people work for a particular organization because they're looking for something, right? Work is called work because if you didn't get paid, or you didn't, in the case of volunteering, if you didn't have the mission or the thing behind it, you wouldn't do it. So if somebody on your team gets to a point in their development, their career, where they realize they actually have a different passion or they have a better opportunity, whether it's monetary or development, you should champion their going on, keeping in mind, yeah, there's a temporary inconvenience and maybe it hurts your pride a bit. But the flip side is that person might end up being a client or a volunteer or a donor one day. Or I keep running into people that used to work for me or I used to work with all the time. I'm fascinated to see what they're up to. And that's led to lucrative interactions on my end, but also from a professional point of view, but also just fabulous life interactions and really cool people to stay in touch with and learn from. So I couldn't agree more. Absolutely.
Yeah, I could see that too. Is like you're saying, if we as leaders are concerned with the people first, and the mission obviously is important too. So I'm not saying it's one or the other, because it's not. You have organizations have to be successful. We have to make money. We have to do these things. We have to make an impact. That's okay. But I think if you're concerned with the person's heart or the person too, then you can kind of see that over time. And I think back to the point you made about 5 generations, or as we have a younger workforce coming in, I have irritation with all the millennials do XYZ, right? All of the Gen Xers and XYZ, like that irritates me. I'm like, just was having this conversation, that so irritates me because I'm like, stop judging people as a class or a group of people, right? That's just one more way of having bias or whatever, discrimination in my opinion. But there is truth to that in terms of like, these are young people coming in and they're still trying to figure it out. And so I think back to the grace thing, you have a company that's 5 generations. How do I lead them? Well, you have to look at 5 generations of people and realize they're on all different stages and classes of work, like you're saying, and they all need different things. And yes, that is tiring and exhausting. But the new guys coming in maybe are going to be more like, I don't really know if I like this or not. They're going to have to try before they buy, and there's got to be, some flexibility, I think, to that. And then maybe, like you said, the older, people are kind of in the place of getting ready to retire and they're like, that stuff doesn't interest me anymore. I'm not doing that. So I think we just need to take a step back and see people for who they are. And then, like you said, the second piece of that proximity principle, like Ken Coleman calls it, I think, where he's like, the rings of people that you meet in your life, those rings are going to be there, ripples. And so you might work with this person today, but I've seen it more times than not, like you, like 5 years from now or 10 or 15 years from now, I come back into a circle or community with this person and I would have never thought I saw you again. But now we're working together on a project or we're collaborating on something. Kind of the cycle continues. So it's important, I think, back to the loving them well, not being mean. I guess a question to the follow up that would be then, well, how do we create a culture where we are comfortable talking about these emotions and safe place where we can put these biases on the table? Like, how do we create a culture on our teams in order for us to be able to have those conversations?
I think the first thing we do is, as a leader, we set the climate for everyone else. So one of the most powerful things you can do as a leader is just to be vulnerable at times of vulnerability. So if, let's say, like we just described a situation where, maybe your kid kept you up at night, coming into the office and saying, hey, everybody, just a heads up, if I'm a little out of it today or I seem distracted, I'm a little sleep deprived. So apologies in advance and thank you for your patience. Kind of being willing to share those details and model the behavior that you see. So it's interesting. I'm a type 1 diabetic, as I mentioned. I had a really bad night last night. I ate something that had hidden carbohydrates. So I was reminded there were definitely times where I would come into work. And I really don't like to draw attention to it because I don't want people to think of me as anything more than just myself, like I'm being influenced by a condition. But there was definitely a time where I said, hey guys, I'm not feeling good today. I'm going to go to my office and just close the door. If you need anything, if it's an emergency, definitely come in. Otherwise, I'm going to push meetings till tomorrow because I can't be as focused as I'd like to be. So just little things like that. People may not share, but at least they know if he's doing that or she's doing that or they're doing that, there's probably a reason, or rather I can do it too. I think the other thing that we can do is to invite people to share. So in the book, one of the practices I talk through, and by the way, I really want to stress, we're talking about a lot of soft things. These are all highly actionable. You can do all of these things and alter that, because I have arguments all the time about, is EQ teachable? Absolutely. What do you think therapy is? That's in the 5 generation. We're in the post-therapy generation coming in. They're much more acclimated to this idea of talking about feelings and emotions, but you can absolutely change your behavior and how you understand other people's behavior. So to that effect, if you come in your one-on-ones, one of the action steps, I say, start adding a question at the start that says, hey, before we jump into work, how are you feeling today? Like we said at the beginning, they might share their emotions. They might not. But that at least gives them the space, whether it's somebody late in their career, earlier in their career, if there's something that they want to bring up and there's a support that they need from you, just asking is a really powerful first step to take.
Right. Yeah, that's so good. I think that's really great. And I think that when you, like you said, set the stage and kind of open the door, it doesn't have to turn into a sensing session every day, right? Like that's not what we're saying. There's work to be done. People need things, but it is that safety or psychological safety we talk about more on like diverse thoughts or concepts, but it's the same thing, I think, too. And there's healthy boundaries in that for sure. We recognize all those things too. So we're not just saying wild, wild west, but I think it's super important. And I go back and look over even my military career. Like I was very task oriented. I'm very action oriented. Get in, put my uniform on. We have work to do. We have a mission. And I wasn't really the friend. I was talking with my kids about this recently. My husband and I used to work together when we were at active duty. So we've known each other a really long time. So I wasn't the one that they called and wanted to have coffee or hang out with or whatever. And so that was isolating, to be honest. As I was a young airman coming up in the military, I kind of sat off to the side. I wasn't included in the jokes, all those kinds of things. But at midnight, when one of the airmen's wives attempted suicide and took a handful of pills, and he's standing in the emergency room or on the way to the emergency room holding a 3-month-old baby in one hand and his wife in the other, he called me. He's like, Sergeant Castro, can you meet me at the ER? I don't know what to do. She's done XYZ. I don't know. I had the baby. I don't know what to do. I have a handful of those stories where it was just like, I might not be the person that everybody wants to like shoot the breeze with or whatever. And they might growl about me behind my back, which was a common kind of thing. But when it really mattered, there was this piece where they were like, no, I'm calling you because I need someone I can trust and I need someone that I know that's going to be there. And in retrospect, that means more to me than any kind of social club, that I wasn't a part of. So I think that would be the offering. I would say, like in our minds, like you're saying, how do we teach emotional intelligence? It might look different than you think that it is when you're talking about how can you create this space. But it's not all touchy-feely friend group stuff. It might just be more like you're saying, opening the door for that person to really come to you when they need something.
First of all, that's an awesome story. And I'm thrilled that airmen felt comfortable reaching out to you. And maybe they didn't joke around with you, but clearly that person felt some kind of safety and security with you and saw you as a very competent person that they could trust. I think it's really interesting because I've been doing some work with an organization that has a bunch of research out of Columbia University on trust specifically. And again, we've thrown out these fluffy words, but they speak about trust. It's a label that we attach to the way that people think about the people around them. Psychologically, emotionally, do they feel like the people around them have their back, support their best interests, crucial aspects to teamwork, which then translate to actual business performance. And what this organization found is that the single most important ingredient to trust, and by proxy to performance, to a tune of like 20% more performance when this happens, is that in moments where individuals have a very negative experience, either a peer or a manager is supportive. So this could be as simple as just saying, hey, I'm really sorry that happened. Let me know if I can do anything, but I'm sorry too. Sure, I'll meet you at the emergency room. That is the single most important thing you can do when that person does share with you something to express support. If you don't have it, it's 3.5 times more expensive and more difficult to build that person's engagement and performance. So if you lose it, you're in a lot of trouble and you can expect to waste a lot of money on HR programs to try to build that person up. But if you do it in the moment, that's the thing that enables that trust to take root. So it sounds like, I bet you that person remembers you for the rest of their life too.
Maybe. Yeah. I haven't talked to him in 20 years. I think that's so good. I did an executive leadership course at Chapel Hill years ago when I worked with the Army, and they taught the trust equation. And I actually have that in my book, but it talks about trust. And I find it encouraging when you can take a concept like trust or motivation or whatever and break it down into factors, right? So that's what in different leadership groups and classes and different things over the years, I kind of held on to that one formula because I'm like, there's an equation. We can quantify this. So when we sit in a group, to your point, and I have a team of people who are saying, well, we don't have trust or we need more trust. And you're like leading the group as in discussion, and you're kind of like, okay, but can you quantify the element that's missing in your trust? And a lot of them are like, well, everybody just knows what trust is. You just do it. And I'm like, it doesn't. It's actually not. We all have a different perspective about what it is. So I love that there's research being done to say, okay, how do we quantify it? And then we can measure it, right? And then we have language, which I love, so that I can sit down as a trust. Like if I use that equation, right? It's credibility plus respect plus intimacy. So those three things, right? Divided by your own self-interest. So if I perceive you to be more motivated by your own self-interest than you are about mine, then I have a negative trust. But if I see you as credible or respected and intimate, like we have a connection, which doesn't have to be creepy. You know what I mean? It just is that personal thing where you see me and I see you as a human, then I'm going to have more trust for you. And when I do lay that out, or when I lay that out sometimes in teaching or doing things, and then I can start to dig into the elements, people are like, I don't respect that person, or I don't think they're credible because they're not an expert. And then you can start to break apart the pieces where you're like, oh, this is the issue. Trust is big, but it's actually credibility or respect that's missing. And how do we enable that? It'll be interesting to see. You'll have to keep me updated on your research and where that goes. I think that's fascinating. So talk to me a little bit about your book. In June, you published your bestseller book titled How to Suck Less as a Manager, which I love, a practical guide to making your team less miserable today. So can you tell us about the problem that prompted you to write the book? Like, what was your catalyst for writing the book first?
Well, I think maybe we share something, Danita, which is through the course of our careers, we really want others to succeed. And I would constantly see situations where people I was mentoring or talking with, or me, myself, were going through situations where we had toxic managers who either didn't know how to manage, couldn't prioritize it, or were just kind of not great people and were doing kind of harmful things to others. And there were so many times where it was the same issue over and over again. Whether it was, hey, why aren't you recognizing people on your team? You don't give any positive feedback, to you're not actually helping this person get promoted. And at the end of the day, they're going to leave if they can't. Why aren't you trying to align your plans to what they need? So I started compiling a compendium of the things that I was seeing that worked at organizations that I either was at and got to witness, or by virtue of having access to literally hundreds of executives as a consultant over the past, decade plus, and also government leaders and also nonprofit leaders. And in compiling that, I started to see some trends come through. And I also knew that as a former comedian and a really snarky dude, if I was going to actually have fun writing this, I had to make it funny. And to the title, so there's some data from Gallup that 82% of people in management positions, people that lead other people, don't have the skills to do it. 1 in 5 people who's a manager, less, kind of is good at it and knows what to do. So is it a wonder why we see so many situations where people leave jobs because of management, or we see these dips in engagement and well-being? Another study found that managers have as much influence on the health and well-being of the people that report to them as people's spouses. More than doctors, more than therapists, more than parents, it's managers. That's a lot of responsibility for people that don't have the skills and may not be prioritizing the time and attention. So my goal, let's make something that's entertaining to read, but let's also be highly prescriptive, very focused on specific actions like what we've been talking about. Do this that you can do right now based on the things that you need. And then a couple months later, the book was produced.
That's so cool. So can you give us the top 3? Your favorite 3? Maybe not the top 3, but what are your favorite 3?
Well, one that's very top of mind for me based on what we've been talking about is micromanagement. Micromanagement takes up, if you're a manager, you got better things to do with your time and there's an infinite number of things on your plate. It's going to stress you out. If you're a high performer, having autonomy to do your work is one of the top things you care about. You're going to leave if you're micromanaged. So it's a really terrible practice. Why does it happen? It happens because there's a lack of trust. Usually on the part of the manager, something about the relationship, either they don't trust the person involved to do something, or they aren't comfortable ceding control of something to other people. There's a lot of fear, right? And sometimes they don't even realize they're doing it. So there's exercises in the book around everything from let's figure out what's at the root of the trust issue to how can you communicate with the person that's on your team so that you build trust. So for example, be very clear about when you want to catch up with them on a project. Be very clear about what metrics you're trying to achieve. Be very clear about the role that you're going to play and the role that they're going to play. So everybody has equal expectations up front. So micromanagement's a huge one for me. Another one is what we talked about, humility, self-awareness. If somebody asks me, what's the number one thing I can improve right now as a manager? I always say it's the fancy corporate word is metacognition. The human word is next time something bad happens, go take a seat and try to figure out what actually took place. How are you feeling? Why did you act the way you acted? What events led up to it? It's okay to make mistakes, but to truly own them and be responsible, try to figure out why you made the mistake. So those are 2 of my favorites for sure, and 2 that are top of mind because they keep coming up, even now after talking to so many people about the book 4 months later or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Like you said, micromanagement. I appreciate that you said the clarity part because I see that a lot with leadership. Like we were just talking about that this week. We cast a vision or we have a vision, especially as a founder, you start a company, you have a problem that you're trying to solve. It keeps you up late at night, all the things. And so that's awesome and great. And then you have a team or organization and we don't always effectively communicate what clear intentions are, or when we might not know. To your point, sometimes we don't know. And so that's kind of on us. And we don't know why we feel the way we feel. We just know we're unhappy or we don't like it, but we don't know why. And I think that goes back to the whole point of the conversation. Like we own that. Like we have a responsibility to lead ourselves and others well. And that starts with us first. And that starts understanding who we are, why we feel the way we feel, like you said, why we got mad, why we snapped, why we didn't, why we are the helicopter boss or parent. What is all that stuff that's going on underneath the surface? And I think that's so good. And then I love the part that you said about if you bumble the ball, being responsible enough to own it, because I don't know how many times, I mean, that goes back to relationships too, right? My kids are adults now. All my kids are adults. So we had 25 years of parenting lessons learned. And the one thing I go back to that I heard a long time ago was don't hurt their hearts. And I was just talking with someone the other day about parenting and I mentioned that to her and I just said, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to snap. You're going to yell at somebody for not picking up their shoes after the 14th time. You're going to do it. We're human. But then you apologize and you say you're sorry and you go back and say, I should not have said the thing. I should not have done the whatever. And if you do that, there is great grace. So I've worked with leaders who just that place, like you're saying, just that authentic place of them just saying, I don't have the answers. I don't know. I'm trying, struggling. And to be on the other side of the table, you're like, okay, it's all right. We're going to figure it out. And that goes so far. So you've got your book and you've got your consulting. Is there anything, I think, to talk a little bit about the workshops you do and stuff? Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Like how you have this book and you have these lessons. Now, how do you come into organizations and help them kind of overcome those or grow?
Well, it's after so long in the consulting world, one of the things, again, what have I seen over and over that's a little frustrating? I'm like, we should do it differently, is having a really pre-prescribed, this is the methodology. It's steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have views on how people learn and take on new behavior, but every organization, just like every person, is different. So one of the things I really prioritize is trying to get to the root of what are we actually trying to solve, and then creating a curriculum based on the variety of best hits and skills and areas that we develop that's unique to the organization we're dealing with. That's actually a little bit behind the name of the company, Depth Charge. It's a nod to my background as a Navy brat, but also with a depth charge, you're trying to figure out how deep is the submarine. It's a little bit of a guessing game. And for us, something could be very surface level. It's just, oh, hey, the reason that you guys aren't connecting as a team is because you're communicating poorly and you're not using measurable quantities. Cool, let's just fix that. But sometimes it could be a lot deeper, such as, hey, actually, you've got a cultural problem here because you're punishing vulnerability, and that's hurting your company's ability to adapt. So we're actually going to need to address a couple of layers of leader. Regardless of once we identify the problem, it's a combination of let's get together and think about practices, again, actionable things that we can do. Let's put them into practice, and then let's reflect on them, whether in groups or in one-on-one coaching. That is an important part of what I try to put out. If I just come in and teach something, people will get a lot, but in a month, they're going to lose 75% of it if they don't actually use it. I'm very serious about actually helping the companies I work with. I want to follow up. I want to make sure that we're helping people actually take advantage of what we're teaching and make sure it's implemented.
That's so good. So when should they call you and who should call you? Is it like a CEO is calling for coaching and think, Ben, I'm having a problem? Or is it HR, my team's having a problem? Like when do they typically call you?
Absolutely. As an example, I have one organization now which just knows that people at a certain level in the organization are burning out. And there seems to be a disconnect between a middle manager level and an upper management level. So they call me both to try to figure out what's happening here. What's the disconnect, but then to try to come up with an issue together. I'd say anytime you see a dip in engagement, a dip in quality of output, feelings that are changing, definitely I'm happy to be your bat phone. The other piece, in today's environment, this is a cliche, but it's true. Change is constant. It's faster than ever. There is so much stressful activity happening and disruption. There aren't many organizations that I've seen that are inoculated against change fatigue and stress. But there's some really simple things that organizations can do to actually become more resilient. One of them is just change how you think about disruption. If you assume it's going to happen, it becomes a lot less problematic. And how you build that into team culture. So I also talk a lot to organizations that are undergoing something big like an M&A or a new model, a business model, or a fundamental transformation to how they work with their clients. And we'll come in to try to figure out, much like a change management, but with the added, how do we make our managers, who are the key fulcrum of change, how do we also help them get set up for success?
That's really important. And I think, like you said, you've got the world changing, in this paradigm. And then you've got organizations trying to adapt and change still. And then you've got the little smaller pieces. I work a lot in the defense tech space with innovation, right? So we're always about innovation and disruptive thinking, all those kinds of things, design thinking, all that stuff, which I think is great. But I say innovation is not software tool, right? It's a mindset. And it has to be all the elements of it. And so when you see an organization, take the government, for example, right? Because we're like super hyper focused on trying to innovate the government. But do we understand what that actually means? And I think the answer is no, because innovation has to be the entire architecture, right? The ecosystem, policies, and training and education and leadership and management. But it also needs to be the systems and processes that we use, of course, and the tools that we use, of course. But it's a mindset. It's so much bigger than that. And we don't even really know how to reframe that. So we get stuck. At least the government does get stuck. And it's not their fault, I think. It's just trying to take one model and stick it in a completely different model. They're not going to fit together organically. There's just going to have to be a lot of change. And I think change management, the other thing too I love about that is that grief, which I didn't know that 20 years ago. It's all grief, right? If you take change and then you just layer the grief cycle underneath it, it's the same thing. You're going through these places. And so we as people don't talk about grief. We talk about grief in terms of death. We don't talk about grief in terms of change, but there's a loss happening or perceived loss always, right? And the fear and the anxiety and all that stuff, but it's all under the surface. And then when you get a person who, I go back to those classes, where you used to take the assessment, like, are you a change agent? Like what on the spectrum, where are you? But I think the inappropriate part of that, now if I look back, it was just like, that person who we consider is like not going to change is really because of the grief part, right? Or that fear or whatever. So they might be willing to change as long as you can work through that grief and fear with them. And then we go back to how much time do you spend? So the models like focus on that 80% or focus on the 10% that are the change agents. But you're kind of like, okay, but there's a lot more going on here than just willingness to change. So anyway, I think it's good. I think grief is a big part of our life that we don't really fully understand. And I go back to fear, like you said too, but we don't know it's fear. At one point, I remember sitting in a briefing, we were doing something and I said that out loud. I said, well, what are we afraid of? And the majority of people around the table were like, I'm not afraid of anything. Kind of like, nope, we're obviously afraid of something. Like we're afraid of failure. What's the fear? Because we have a fear here that's keeping us from moving forward. What is it? And they were all just like, we're not afraid. And I was like, okay, maybe a different day. We'll talk about a different feeling tomorrow. So I think that's really good. People want to work with you, change management, or they just feel like some disconnect, like you're saying, some organizational piece is missing, or there's those things. They would reach out to you and find help.
Yes, they could find me a couple ways. I'm at depthchargeconsulting.com. There's a number of ways there to just drop us a line. If you want to check out the book, you go to howtosucklessbooks.com because there are a couple more in the pipeline that will be coming soon. Also, I guess you could just put out a bat signal with like a square-headed outline. Oh, that's probably for me, and I'll just run toward it.
You'll just know the internet. You'll just have it flagged on TikTok or whatever. I think it's really great, Ben. I'm super excited to see how your book adventures go. It's definitely the new book. I know that the journey of writing a book is a whole different life and an adventure. So hats off to you for finishing a book and getting it out into the world. I know that's a big thing, and being willing to say, I'm going to write more. So there's a courage there. I think that some people who haven't done it don't really understand. So be excited to see. And then let me know how your research on the change stuff goes in the trust. I would love to stay in touch with you.
I'd love that too, anytime. And what an awesome conversation. I learned so much, and it was great to speak to you.
Me too. So if anybody needs any help or wants to talk about feelings or any of those other things, make sure you reach out to Ben. We'll put all the in the show notes too, so everybody can reach out to you. But it's been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Danita.
Wow, what a rich conversation. I hope you found as much value in Ben's wisdom as I did. If you're ready to lead with more intentionality and emotional intelligence, today's episode is a great starting point. Don't forget to check out Ben's book, How to Suck Less as a Manager, for more practical insights. And as always, thank you for tuning in to the Entrusted to Lead podcast. Be sure to subscribe and share the episode with a friend who could use some leadership or inspiration. And until next time, friend, lead with your heart and lead with faith. And remember that you are entrusted to lead. So keep showing up every day, even when it hurts, because you matter. Have an amazing day. I'll see you later.